The air in the squad room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and impending snowfall. Detective Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a man whose face carried the permanent shadows of 20 years on the force, was staring at a topographical map of Redwood County, but his mind was on the quiet. Too quiet. His partner, Detective Eva Rourke, was polishing an apple at her desk, her movements meticulous and unervingly calm. She caught his eye, a hint of a challenge in her smile. You know, they say silence is golden, Marcus. Maybe today is a gold day. Gold is what we get when we solve a case, Rook. This is the silence before the scream, Thorne grumbled, reaching for his mug. The last few weeks had been frustratingly routine. A couple of petty thefts, a domestic disturbance that ended in hurt feelings and a broken vase. The silence shattered at 3:17 p.m. Thorne Rourke, you're up. Captain Davies' voice boomed from the doorway. He looked genuinely rattled, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. It's a 10 to 54, over by the Blackwood Forest Preserve. We got a patrol unit on scene. They're asking for homicide. Blackwood Forest. Thorne felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a place the locals, even the seasoned officers, spoke about in hushed tones, a vast ancient wilderness rumored to swallow secrets whole. What's the nature of the discovery, Captain? Rourke asked, her tone instantly switching to professional efficiency. Davies swallowed hard. A hiker found a car. Abandoned. Patrol ran the plates. Belongs to a university student, Ilara Vance, reported missing 3 days ago. The key detail? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The patrolman, they didn't find a body, but they found a bloody handprint on the driver's side door. Not a smudge, Thorne. A perfect 5-finger print, smeared down like someone tried to push their way out. And get this, the print is from a right hand. The print on the inside of the window is from a left hand. No body. No struggle. Just that. Thorne's breath hitched. A struggle with 2 hands on opposite sides of a window. But where was the struggle? Where was Ilara? And the hook, Captain? Thorne asked, his voice low. Davies looked him straight in the eye. The car was locked. From the inside. And the blood? It's not Ilara's. 15 minutes later, the unmarked Crown Vic was bouncing over a rutted service road leading into the preserve. The trees here were impossibly tall, their canopies so dense they blotted out the late afternoon sun, plunging the road into a premature twilight. The scene was marked by a single patrol car flashing red and blue against the encroaching gloom. 2 young officers, Miller and Chong, stood beside a dark blue sedan, their faces etched with a distress that went beyond standard police work. Detective Thorne, Detective Rourke, Miller began, his voice trembling slightly. We haven't touched anything. Just secured the perimeter. Thorne and Rourke approached the vehicle. It was a late-model Honda Civic, seemingly pristine except for the gruesome detail that had earned the call-out. On the driver's side, a viscous smear of deep red blood started near the lock and dragged down to the door handle. It was undeniably a human handprint, and the macabre detail the captain mentioned was undeniable. The fingers were spread and splayed, an unmistakable gesture of a person trying to stop a door from closing or maybe stop themselves from being pulled out. Rourke took photos before Thorne even fully processed the sight. Looks like a Type O negative, she muttered, checking the key detail. Right hand palm facing out. Thorne moved to the window. The car glass was lightly fogged from the cold air, but there it was on the inside. A fainter, smaller but equally distinct handprint. A left hand, fingers curled as if grasping for purchase. She was locked in, Thorne breathed. Trying to open the door, maybe? Rourke shook her head, her gaze sharp and focused on the interior. No, Marcus. Look at the passenger seat. The seats are clean. The door panels are clean. If she was locked in and struggling, there would be hair, scuffs, something. This looks too surgical. Thorne leaned in, peering through the window into the back seat. That's when he saw it. On the gray fabric of the rear seat, perfectly centered, lay a single neatly folded piece of white paper. It wasn't the kind of note a victim would leave. It looked like a formal document. Rourke, there's a note, Thorne said, his voice dropping. He motioned for Chong to retrieve the long-reach tool from the trunk. As Chong fumbled with the thin metal grabber, Rourke pointed to the windshield. Look up, Marcus. Look at the trees. Thorne followed her gaze. The Blackwood Forest was known for its dark, brooding appearance. But high up, near where the ancient, skeletal branches intertwined, something was dangling. Something that caught the last rays of the sun. It was a piece of white fabric tied to a branch, flapping gently in the wind. A small, embroidered patch of a university seal. Belara Vance's University. A marker, Rourke whispered, her eyes wide. Or bait. Just as Chang managed to secure the folded paper with the tool, a sound sliced through the silence of the forest. A low, mechanical click, followed by a faint, metallic groan. They all froze. The sound came from the dense, overgrown section of the woods, far from the service road. Thorne looked at the note now clutched in Chang's hand, then at the branch with the flapping cloth. Get the paper back to the lab, Chang. Do not open it. Miller, stay with the car. Rourke with me. And draw your weapon. Rourke was already moving toward the trees, her silhouette swallowed by the shadows almost instantly. Thorne followed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cold air suddenly felt like a heavy, wet blanket. Click, groan. The sound was closer now, and it sounded less like something mechanical and more like a door slowly, painfully opening in the heart of the ancient, silent Blackwood forest. Thorne rounded a thick cluster of pines and saw Rourke standing dead still, her pistol aimed, her body tense. Ahead of them, almost hidden by the undergrowth, was an opening in the dense forest wall. It was too regular, too structured to be natural. A structure built from rough-hewn, black-stained wood. And it had a door. A heavy, iron-bound door that was unmistakably creaking open. A wave of cold, earthy air, smelling of deep soil and something metallic, something like ozone and old blood, rushed out. Then, from the darkness behind the partially open door, a single raspy voice whispered, a voice that was too deep to be human and too close to be safe. She's coming back for the key. The words, she's coming back for the key, hung in the frigid air like a curse. Detective Thorne felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, his grip tightening on his weapon. The voice was a gravelly whisper, yet it seemed to vibrate the very air around them, carrying an impossible echo. Rourke, despite her rigid stance, was the first to react. Police, show yourself. Now. The door, heavy and black, stopped its agonizing groan. The opening was just wide enough to reveal a sliver of inky darkness. There was no reply, only the heavy, silent presence of the ancient forest. Marcus, Rourke whispered, her eyes never leaving the gap. That wasn't a man's voice. It sounded amplified, like it was coming through metal or bone. Thorne lowered his gun slightly, scanning the shadows. The structure was clearly not a Park Service building. It was too remote, too hidden, and built with a grim, deliberate sense of purpose. The wood looked like it had been salvaged from the deepest parts of the swamp and treated with something dark and noxious. Whatever it is, it just spoke, Thorne said, keeping his voice steady. And it knows about the car. It knows about her. He took a measured step toward the opening, Rourke moving seamlessly to cover his flank. The scent of ozone and iron grew stronger, mingling now with a faint, cloying sweetness, like lilies left too long in a stagnant room. Redwood PD. We are entering the premises. Thorne yelled into the darkness, a formality he knew was useless. They moved through the gap. The first thing that hit Thorne was the sheer, oppressive darkness. The structure was a single long room built into the earth, a bunker or perhaps an old root cellar that smelled like undisturbed history. There were no windows. The only light was the thin rectangle cast by the still open door behind them. Rourke immediately flicked on her tactical light, cutting a sharp beam through the gloom. The light revealed walls lined with shelving but not for supplies. The shelves were filled with jars. Dozens of them. All sizes. Dear God, Rourke breathed, her voice a strained murmur. The jars weren't holding preserves. They held organic matter suspended in cloudy, amber fluid. Thorne's gaze swept over the collection. Small bones, pieces of dried organs, and things that defied immediate identification, glistening like ghastly jewels. But the centerpiece of the room was a workbench in the center, bathed in Rourke's beam. And on that bench, neatly arranged, was the key the voice had mentioned. It wasn't a house key. It was a single, tarnished brass key, about 6 inches long with a large, elaborate head shaped like a stylized crow's skull. It lay beside a notebook, a heavy, leather-bound journal, and a rusted, surgical-looking tool. Thorne approached the bench slowly, his eyes darting to the dark corners of the structure. Get photos of everything, Rook. We are not touching that key. As Rourke began documenting the scene, Thorne noticed a detail about the journal. Its leather cover was not simply bound, it was held closed by a complicated latch, and the brass key was the only apparent way to open it. The book felt warm to the touch. Suddenly, Rourke's light snapped to the floor, illuminating a patch of freshly disturbed earth near the back wall. Marcus, look. Something was buried here. Thorne moved to her side. The earth was dark and soft, recently replaced, and beside the small patch was a rusted, shallow shovel. It was evident something had been dug up, or buried, very recently. Someone was here, Thorn confirmed, the hair on his arms prickling. They finished their work and they left just as we arrived. That voice, it was a distraction giving them time to disappear. He looked back at the open door, now a beacon of light against the oppressive darkness of the structure. Whatever was buried, it was now gone. And the person who had done the digging was nowhere to be seen. Rourke took one last sweep with her light, and it landed on the far wall, where the shelves of gruesome jars ended. Etched crudely into the black-stained wood at about eye level was a single symbol, a circle split by a vertical line with a small downward-pointing hook on the left side. A sigil, Rourke whispered. Looks like something out of an old witchcraft textbook. Thorn stared at the symbol. It felt malevolent, a silent declaration of ownership over this terrible place. He looked back at the key, then at the journal, and knew the answers to Alara Vance and the bloodied car were locked inside that black leather. We're pulling out, Rook. No. We secure the structure, call the forensics unit, and get the captain down here with a search warrant for this hellhole, Thorn ordered, adrenaline finally flooding his system. But just as he turned to leave, a high-pitched, almost imperceptible whine started vibrating through the floor. It grew rapidly, turning into a resonant, throbbing hum that seemed to be coming from under the structure. The glass jars on the shelves rattled furiously, and the air pressure in the small room dropped suddenly, making their ears pop. What is that? Rourke yelled over the noise, raising her pistol again. The humming stopped as abruptly as it began. And in the silence that followed, a single new detail registered on the workbench, the heavy, leather-bound journal. It was no longer closed. The mysterious latch was open, though no one had touched the brass key. The front page of the journal had unfolded, revealing a page filled with dense, elegant handwriting in deep red ink. And scrawled across the top of the very first page in a different, frantic hand were two words. He found me. Thorn and Rourke stared at the open journal, the words, he found me, stark and terrifying in the dim light. The resonant humming that had briefly rattled the earth had ceased, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. Did you touch that, Rook? Thorn demanded, his voice tight. Rourke shook her head, her tactical light still trained on the workbench. No, Marcus. I was documenting the jars. It just opened. She slowly holstered her weapon, retrieving her glove kit. We need to know what's inside, warrant or no warrant. If the journal is active, this scene is unstable. Thorn knew she was right. A living, moving piece of evidence trumped procedure, especially one that seemed to respond to an unknown tremor. Take pictures of the open page first, Thorn instructed. Don't touch the key. Use the tip of a pen to turn the page. Rourke carefully followed the protocol. The writing was dense, meticulous, and filled with highly technical terminology that suggested a scientific or pseudoscientific background. The journal was clearly the work of a single, obsessive person. The page Rourke first focused on detailed a series of experiments. The text was in the same deep red ink as the frantic inscription. Entry 47. The subject is responding to the stimulus. The oscillation frequency near the Blackwood fault line is a direct match for the required resonance frequency, RF, of the extraction process. The process is not one of removal but of translocation, a momentary shift between states. The issue remains the anchor material, AM. The transfer is too unstable. It leaves behind residue. Rourke paused, reading aloud, her voice strained. Residue? Marcus, what in God's name were they moving? Thorn's eyes went to the jars filled with organic matter, then back to the scene of the abandoned car. The blood that wasn't Alara Vance's. Turn the page, Rook. Find something concrete. Who wrote this? Rourke nudged the heavy parchment. The next page revealed a chilling diagram, a complex geometric shape drawn over a crude map of the Blackwood Forest Preserve, centered precisely where they were standing. Written beneath the diagram was a single heavily underlined name, Professor Alastair Finch. Finch? Thorn repeated, a shadow crossing his face. He went missing 2 years ago. An eccentric historian and theoretical physicist from the university. They thought he finally walked off into the woods for good. Or he walked into this, Rourke countered, pointing to a recent entry near the back of the book, dated just 2 days ago, the day before Alara Vance was reported missing. Entry 73, success. The target T was acquired. The method is sound. The RF was perfectly tuned. The translocation was instantaneous. The subject is receptive. However, the use of the subject's anchor material resulted in an unfortunate byproduct. The partial materialization of the observer's proxy hand. A necessary risk. Thorne felt a sharp, cold spike of realization. The handprints. The blood that wasn't hers. The observer's proxy hand. He's documenting some kind of interdimensional travel, Rook. And Alara Vance was the target they pulled out. But who is the observer? Rourke asked, fear evident in her eyes. And if they pulled her out, where did she go? And why would Finch write, "He found me, just before we got here"? Before Thorne could answer, a loud, panicked shout echoed from the forest road outside. "Detective, we have a situation. Get out here." It was Officer Miller. Thorne and Rourke exchanged a look of pure dread. They burst out of the structure, leaving the gruesome journal open on the bench. Outside, the gloom had deepened into early evening. Officer Miller was standing by the abandoned Civic, his flashlight beam fixed not on the car, but on the ground 50 feet away. "What is it, Miller?" Thorne ran up, his heart pounding. Miller couldn't speak, only pointing a shaking finger toward the clearing. There, resting carefully on the bed of dead pine needles, was Alara Vance's backpack. And beside it, partially obscured by the shadows, was something far more horrifying. It was a large, wet object, a dark crimson, glistening under the patrol car's emergency lights. As Thorne approached, he saw it clearly. It was a massive, fresh piece of raw meat, a chunk of muscle and sinew far too large to belong to any deer or bear in the region. And carved into the flesh, deeply and deliberately, was the exact same sigil they had seen etched into the wall of Professor Finch's bunker. The circle with the vertical line and the small hook. Rourke gasped, covering her mouth. "It's a sacrifice, Marcus. Or a message." Thorne felt a wave of icy nausea. He looked at the sigil on the meat, then back toward the dark maw of the structure where the journal lay open. The voice they heard wasn't a distraction. It was a declaration. Finch hadn't just used Alara Vance. He had opened a door, and whatever he pulled through had left this grotesque offering. Thorne looked at the blackwood forest, the dark shapes of the trees seeming to lean in closer, whispering secrets. "We need to get the captain here with a full hazmat team in the state lab," Thorne commanded, his voice raw. "And find out what the hell translocation means. Because whatever is happening here, Alara Vance is just the first ingredient." As he turned back to secure the structure, he noticed something new about the abandoned car. The deep, bloody handprint on the door had subtly changed. It was darker, wetter, and looked like a fresh layer had been applied since they were last near it. And beneath the original smear, in the space of a single minute, 3 new, perfect, miniature claw marks had been scraped into the blue paint. Captain Davies arrived with a small army, forensics unit, FU, 2 additional patrol cars and a nervous medical examiner, Dr. Lena Chen. The scene was flooded with generators and high-powered lighting, temporarily pushing back the suffocating darkness of the Blackwood Preserve. Thorne and Rourke briefed Davies inside the perimeter tape, keeping their voices low. Davies, a man whose patience was usually measured in milliseconds, listened intently, his face growing paler with every detail. An interdimensional physics experiment, a whispering voice, a symbol and a ritualistic slab of mystery meat? Davies rubbed his temples. "Thorne, this sounds like you've been watching too many documentaries." "Sir, the journal is real. Professor Finch's research is in there. The blood on the car isn't Alara Vance's, and the substance carved with that sigil is not native to this forest," Thorne insisted, nodding toward the evidence markers placed around the grotesque offering. Dr. Chen, wearing full protective gear, knelt by the meat. "Preliminary visual analysis suggests primate origin, Captain. Something large. But the tissue density and cellular structure are anomalous. We'll need the full lab workup." Davies sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Okay. Fu is cataloging the contents of the structure. We seal the journal in an evidence bag, but I want Rourke on it immediately. You analyze that thing, detective. Find us a suspect that isn't a ghost." Hours later, the Blackwood structure was locked down, and Thorne and Rourke were back in the brightly lit, sterile confines of the Redwood County PD's evidence room. The scent of sterilization fluid was a welcome change from the earthy rot of the forest. Rourke carefully removed the leather-bound journal from its bag, wearing thick nitrile gloves. She began cross-referencing Finch's complex diagrams with known theoretical physics texts, while Thorne watched the video playback of the crime scene footage, focusing on the car. "Marcus, I'm finding it," Rourke announced, pulling Thorne away from the monitor. Finch was obsessed with the tier theory. The idea that reality isn't a continuum but a series of overlapping sheets, held together by high-frequency energy. He believed that if you could find the exact resonance frequency of a localized area, You could create a temporary tear and pull an object from one sheet to another. Translocation, Thorne murmured. And the Blackwood Forest is his sweet spot? It sits directly on a major geothermal fault line. Finch theorized the Earth's natural energy vibrations, combined with an external catalyst, would create the perfect RF, Rourke explained, pointing to a diagram that looked disturbingly like a pentagram overlaying a geological map. Thorne focused on a different phrase in the entry about Ilara Vance. The partial materialization of the observer's proxy hand. A necessary risk. What about the anchor material? Thorne asked. It's the stuff that makes the transfer unstable, and Finch said he used the subject's AM. Rourke flipped several pages, landing on a meticulous, almost clinical sketch of human hands and feet. Below it was a brief, chilling paragraph. The anchor material is the substance that tethers the subject to the initial dimension. It is the core of their presence. For the target to be moved completely, a portion of the AM must be sacrificed to stabilize the tear. The easiest, most reliable form of AM is the extremities, hands and feet. They are the conduits of interaction with the initial plane. Thorne felt a cold dread settle in his chest. He didn't pull all of her out, Rook. He took the whole body but left the anchor behind to keep the tear from closing entirely. No, Rourke whispered, her eyes wide with horror. He used her anchor, her hands and feet, as the collateral. But the blood on the car, the proxy hand, was the observer's residue from the other side. That blood came back through the tear. So Ilara Vance is still connected to this dimension, Thorne surmised, tracing the sigil on a printout. And that connection is what's keeping the tear open. And something is using that open door. Just then the phone rang. Thorne grabbed it. Thorne. Detective, it's Dr. Chin. The voice on the other end was tight with barely contained fear. I'm calling from the temporary lab. We got the preliminary blood results from the civic door. Was it Finch's? Thorne asked, holding his breath. No. We have a typo negative, matching the physical profile of the blood on the door. But the DNA is corrupted. The cellular structure is too large and the chromosomes. Thorne, there are 28 pairs of chromosomes. Human beings have 23. Thorne gripped the receiver until his knuckles turned white. 28. That thing. That observer isn't human. The most disturbing part, Detective, Chin continued, her voice dropping, the blood is fresh. The clotting time suggests it was shed no more than 3 hours ago. Someone or something shed that blood onto the car after the structure was sealed. The prints were reactivated. Thorne looked at Rourke, the full weight of the situation crashing down. The evidence room, the fluorescent lights, the security, it was all an illusion of safety. They're coming back, Rook, Thorne said, slamming the phone down. The observer left its anchor material on the car to keep the door open. They're not done in this dimension. We need to find Professor Finch, and we need to find him now. Rourke's eyes flew back to the journal. Wait a minute. Finch wrote, he found me 2 days ago. If he was the observer, why would he be afraid of being found? What if Finch wasn't the observer? What if he was the second target? She flipped to the last page. Scrawled below the frantic entry were coordinates, a longitude and latitude, written in the same red ink. 44.3814. Ring operator. N 122.9 Ring operator. Marcus, Rourke said, pointing to the coordinates. That's not Blackwood. That's a dilapidated hunting cabin 50 miles away, on the far edge of the old timberline ridge. That's where the observer took him, Thorne growled, grabbing his jacket. And he left those coordinates as a desperate clue. Just as they moved toward the door, the lights in the evidence room flickered and died. A thick, resonating hum, the exact same vibration they had heard at the Blackwood structure, started to throb from the walls around them, louder this time, deafening. And from the darkness, a voice, no longer a whisper but a wet, grating sigh, filled the room. The key is now free. The resonant humming ceased as suddenly as the lights had failed. The silence that followed was heavy and unnerving, punctuated only by the nervous breathing of Thorne and Rourke. Status report. Thorne barked into his radio, but the only response was static. The entire wing of the station seemed to be without power. Rourke pulled out her own tactical flashlight, sweeping the beam across the steel shelves of the evidence room. The humming, it was the RF Marcus. It's localized and intense. Whatever caused it, it knew we were here and it shut us down. Thorne moved to the safe where the Blackwood key, the heavy brass key shaped like a crow's skull, had been secured. The key was still there, lying exactly as they had sealed it, under the guard of a thick steel bolt. The key is safe, Thorne confirmed, though the voice's ominous pronouncement still echoed in his mind, "The key is now free." "It didn't mean the physical key, Marcus," Rourke said, pointing to the open journal on the table. "It meant the knowledge. Finch's research. The location. We have the coordinates. We have the key to its next move." Thorne nodded, grabbing the journal and sealing it back in its bag. "Call Davies on a secured line the second power comes back up. Tell him about the blood results and the coordinates. We're taking an unmarked cruiser. Timberline Ridge is 50 miles out. We'll be there long before the cavalry can mobilize." The drive was tense and silent, the darkness of the rural roads broken only by the headlights. The landscape quickly shifted from sparse suburbia to densely packed pines, leading them higher into the old logging territory. Finch's last entry was 2 days ago, Rourke mused, scrolling through a digital backup of the journal on her tablet. He was afraid of the observer finding him. Why would he go to a secluded cabin? Why not contact the authorities? Because he knew what he was involved in, Thorne answered, gripping the steering wheel. He was trying to hide his research and himself. He was afraid of the observer, but he was more afraid of what would happen if the knowledge in that book fell into the wrong hands, or maybe back into the observer's hands. Following the GPS coordinates, they turned onto a barely visible logging trail. The air grew colder and the temperature dropped sharply, chilling the car's interior despite the heater. After 10 minutes of bumping over rough terrain, the trees finally parted, revealing a clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated, single-room hunting cabin, dark and hunched like a weary beast in the moonlight. The wood was gray and rotting and the roof sagged heavily in the middle. "This is it," Thorne said, pulling the cruiser to a stop. They exited the car, drawing their weapons. The silence here was different from Blackwood. It wasn't a profound, ancient silence, but a cold, empty one. The cabin looked abandoned, but Thorne's instincts screamed otherwise. Rourke pointed toward the cabin's porch. "Footprints, Marcus. Fresh. Heavy boot treads, consistent with a man's size, but the depth suggests unusual weight." They moved cautiously toward the only door. The latch was broken, splintered outward as if kicked open violently. Thorne pushed the door open with the barrel of his pistol. The interior was dark and filled with dust motes dancing in their flashlight beams. The single room contained a rusty wood stove, a cot and a small rickety wooden table. And on that table, under the beam of Rourke's light, was Professor Alastair Finch. He was seated upright on a wooden chair, his body perfectly still, dressed in a tweed jacket and slacks. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead, fixed on a spot on the back wall. "Finch," Thorne said, approaching slowly. "He's dead, Rook. No obvious trauma." Rourke moved around the back of the chair. No obvious trauma." She gently lifted the collar of his jacket. A single, surgical incision ran around the base of Finch's neck, barely visible, neat and bloodless. "Clean separation," Rourke murmured, her voice hollow. "He was decapitated. But the wound is entirely cauterized, no bleeding. It's like a high-energy laser cut him." Thorne felt a sickness in his gut. The observer didn't want him dead, it wanted him quiet. He followed Finch's unseeing gaze to the back wall. Etched deeply into the rotting wood, just above where Finch's head would have been, was a familiar, terrifying shape. The sigil, the circle with the vertical line and the hook. And beneath the sigil, written not in red ink but carved with deep, painstaking grooves, were 3 words that chilled Thorne to the bone. "I am the key." "Finch wasn't the second target, Rook," Thorne whispered, his voice catching. "He was the anchor material for the next step. Whatever the observer is, it's not just passing through the tear, it's establishing a permanent foothold here." Rourke's light dropped to Finch's hands, which were resting in his lap. His fingers were stiff and clawed into a position of extreme tension. "Marcus, look at his right hand." Thorne leaned in. Finch's hand was clenched around something small and metallic. He gently pried the fingers open. It wasn't the brass key. It was a single, corroded AA battery. "A battery? What for?" Thorne puzzled. Rourke pointed her light to the table again. Lying next to the battery was a tiny, intricately wired circuit board, a miniature, makeshift power supply. He was trying to power something, Marcus. Something small and portable. A fail-safe. Suddenly, a loud, sustained whump echoed from the floorboards near the cot. It was not a metallic sound but a heavy, organic thud. The noise was instantly followed by a strange, dragging sound, like heavy cloth being pulled across the dusty floor, moving toward the cot. Rourke's light immediately snapped to the source of the noise. Underneath the cot, partially obscured by a thick, dark blanket, was a shape. a low hunched form. And as the light hit it, the dragging stopped. The dark shape under the cot twitched. The dark shape under the cot froze as Rourke's powerful beam hit it. The silence in the cabin intensified, thick with dust and dread. "Police, show your hands," Rourke commanded, her voice steady but sharp, her weapon aimed squarely at the shadows. There was no verbal response. The heavy, dark blanket shifted slightly, revealing a flash of pale, dirty skin and an unnatural jet of bone. The dragging sound had been caused by the shape maneuvering its bulk. Thorne moved to the opposite side of the cot, providing cross coverage. "It's small, Rook. Too small for the observer unless it's hunched over." "Or it's not the observer," Rourke countered. "It could be the target. Elara Vance." "If it is, she's in shock or worse," Thorne said. "I'm going to try to move the cot." He kicked the leg of the rusty cot. The frame scraped loudly against the floorboards. The object beneath it reacted violently. It let out a low, strangled hiss, a sound of pain and aggression, and then lunged. The dark blanket was thrown off, and the figure scrambled out from under the cot with shocking speed. It was indeed a young woman, thin and gaunt, covered in dirt and rags. It was Elara Vance. But she was not whole. Her eyes were wide and milky white, and she moved with a jarring insect-like gait. Her clothing was ripped, exposing skin that was unnaturally pale and covered in long parallel scratch marks. She didn't look at them, she fixed her vacant, white gaze on the circuit board and the AA battery on the table. Most horrifyingly, the skin over both of her hands and feet was gone. The exposed tissue was a mass of red, scarred muscle and bone, the anchor material that Finch had sacrificed. The damaged tissue glistened with a sickening, wet sheen. "Elara, we're police. We're here to help you." Thorne stepped forward, his weapon remaining lowered. Elara Vance didn't acknowledge his voice. She let out a high, pained shriek, less a human sound and more a frequency of static, and lunged across the small cabin floor toward the table, moving with a strength that defied her emaciated appearance. "She's going for the circuit board," Rourke shouted. Thorne intercepted her, wrapping his arms around her torso. Elara fought back with a terrifying ferocity, her muscle stumps flailing and scraping at his jacket. Her strength was overwhelming, not a struggle of panic, but a struggle driven by single-minded, desperate purpose. "She's not here, Marcus. It's just the shell," Rourke yelled. As Thorne wrestled to restrain the powerful, desperate girl, he felt a sharp, metallic object tear into his shoulder. Elara wasn't trying to fight him, she was trying to claw through him to get to the table. With a final, desperate surge of unnatural strength, Elara tore free from Thorne's grasp. She scrambled onto the table, seizing the small circuit board and the AA battery. She immediately shoved the battery into a tiny slot on the board. The moment the connection was made, a brilliant, blinding blue arc of electricity snapped across the circuit. The small device emitted a loud, sustained beep, and then the blue light faded into a slow, rhythmic, blinking green pulse. Elara Vance went instantly rigid, her eyes rolling back into her head. Her limbs went slack and she collapsed onto the table, unconscious. Thorne, breathing hard and clutching his bleeding shoulder, moved to the table, staring at the small, blinking device clutched in Elara's injured hands. "What the hell did she just activate?" Thorne asked Rourke. Rourke examined the device without touching it. "It's a low-power transmitter. Finch must have designed it as a beacon, a way to signal his own escape or perhaps, to signal help." Thorne pointed to the blinking green light. "If she was the subject and Finch was the last anchor material, then what is this?" Suddenly, the green light on the circuit board changed color. It pulsed rapidly, flashing from green to an urgent, frantic red. And then the red light stopped. The device went dark. In the ensuing silence, a sound began outside the cabin. Not the high-frequency hum of the RF, but a low, guttural, dragging sound coming from the tree line. It was the sound of something heavy, something powerful, moving through the undergrowth. Rourke's eyes widened in terror, fixed on the doorway. "Marcus, that transmitter wasn't a beacon for us. It was a locator. For the observer," Thorne finished, drawing his pistol again and leveling it at the door. Elara's struggle wasn't to turn it on, it was a forced activation. The observer knew what Finch had hidden here. The dragging sound stopped right outside the dilapidated cabin door. The old wood of the cabin began to vibrate violently, and dust poured down from the rafters. A wet, heavy thump hit the door, followed by a sound like deep, ragged breathing. Then a single, impossibly long, dark claw slowly scraped its way into the gap near the broken latch. It was thick and obsidian black, ending in a razor-sharp hooked tip, and it left a deep gouge in the rotten wood. The voice that spoke next was no longer a whisper. It was a deafening, cavernous roar that seemed to tear at the sanity of the listeners. The anchor is free. Now comes the recalibration. The claw retracted, and the cabin door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a force no human could possess. The wooden door disintegrated inward, showering Thorn and Rourke with rotten splinters and dust. They shielded their eyes, firing simultaneously into the blinding darkness that filled the doorway, aiming low at the source of the guttural breathing. The rounds connected with a sickening, wet thud, but there was no cry of pain, only a deeper, resonant growl that shook the very foundation of the cabin. "It's heavily armored, Marcus. Aim for the head," Rourke shouted, adjusting her aim. A massive, hulking shape, vastly larger than a man and moving with disconcerting speed, filled the doorway. It was vaguely bipedal, but its posture was hunched and unnatural. Its surface was obsidian black, reflecting no light, absorbing the beams of their flashlights. The most striking features were two long, powerful arms that ended in the hooked, obsidian claws they had seen scrape the door. This was the Observer. Or, perhaps, a proxy of the Observer, a materialized entity from the other dimension. The creature lunged, not at the detectives, but straight for the table where Alara Vance lay unconscious, the deactivated circuit board clutched in her mangled hands. "It wants the transmitter," Thorn yelled. He fired his last 2 rounds, hitting the creature's shoulder mass. The impacts were negligible, but they were enough of a distraction. The creature paused its advance, its massive head snapping toward Thorn. Its face was a nightmare of biomechanics, a skeletal frame covered in taut, pale skin, dominated by 2 immense, vacant sockets. It had no visible eyes, only a distorted maw that seemed to absorb sound. Rourke emptied her magazine, targeting the head. The heavy bullet struck the skull with a metallic clang, causing the creature to stagger for a moment. "Reload. Get out of here, Rook. Get Alara out," Thorn ordered, dropping to one knee to fumble for a fresh magazine. Rourke hesitated for a split second, then grabbed the limp body of Alara Vance. She hauled the girl over her shoulder, a move of desperate, raw strength, and backed toward the small, broken window on the opposite wall. The Observer noticed the movement and redirected its attention. It took a single, slow step toward Rourke, the sheer size of its movement causing the floorboards to creak and crack. Thorn finished reloading and immediately fired a stream of suppressive fire, hitting the creature in the chest. The Observer stopped, letting out a sound of pure, concentrated fury, a high-frequency scream that felt like ice picks stabbing into their ears. It wheeled around, its long hooked claws scraping across the floor as it spun. Thorn didn't wait. He sprinted past the creature, grabbing the leather-bound journal, Professor Finch's research, from the table. He shoved it into his jacket pocket. "I've got the book. Now or never, Rook." Rourke, with Alara over her shoulder, kicked out the remaining glass in the window frame and vaulted through, disappearing into the cold night air. Thorn fired 2 more rounds into the creature's knee joint, aiming for a weak point. The creature reacted not with pain, but with an accelerated roar of rage, and swung one of its massive hooked arms in a devastating arc. Thorn ducked under the blow, the wind shear making his ears pop. He scrambled backward, diving out of the shattered front doorway. He landed hard in the dirt, rolling to his feet, and immediately turned back to the cruiser. The engine was still running. Inside the cabin, the creature let out another deafening scream, then began systematically destroying the furniture, searching for the transmitter that Alara had activated. Thorn reached the Crown Vic just as Rourke emerged from the trees, dragging Alara Vance toward the passenger side. "Get her in. Now," Thorn ordered, jumping into the driver's seat. Rourke wrestled Alara's inert body into the back seat, securing the girl with a hasty seatbelt. She slid into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and looked back at the cabin. Through the broken doorway, the dark shape of the Observer paused its rampage. It seemed to perceive their movement, its vacant face turning slowly toward the cruiser. The Observer didn't run. It simply lifted its massive, hooked right hand toward the sky, its posture one of grotesque supplication. Thorn floored the accelerator, tires spitting mud and gravel as the car shot backward. As they tore out of the clearing, Rourke looked through the back window and let out a strangled cry. Where the Observer stood, the air began to shimmer. A visible, circular field of blue light, crackling with static energy, erupted around the creature. It was the localized tear. And as the blue light intensified, the Observer began to shrink, its enormous bulk condensing, folding in on itself, disappearing back into the shimmering singularity. "It's closing the door," Thorn said, his voice flat. It's gone. Rourke, trembling, looked at the receding scene. No, Marcus. It's not gone. Look at what it left behind. Near where the observer had stood, the body of Professor Finch had been moved. The decapitated body was now lying prone, its posture rigid, forming the shape of the sigil on the ground. And placed squarely on the center of Finch's back, perfectly aligned with his spine, was the small handheld circuit board and the AA battery. The device was now pulsing with a slow, powerful red light. Thorne sped down the logging trail, the shock of the encounter finally wearing off, replaced by raw adrenaline and confusion. The recalibration, Thorne muttered. It used the target, Elara, to activate the device and Finch's body to stabilize the tear. It's using Finch's residual anchor material to power the circuit. And the red light, Marcus? Rourke asked, turning to face him, her face pale in the dashboard light. What does the red light mean? Thorne's mind raced, recalling Finch's precise, meticulous nature. If green was the signal for help, or activation, then red. Red means danger. Or it means maximum power, Thorne said, pulling onto the main road, heading back toward civilization. The observer isn't retreating, Rook. It's charging something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather journal. Opening it to the final page where the coordinates were written, he noticed one more tiny detail, scrawled in the same red ink that Finch used. RF, max, equals 5 days. Thorne felt a cold wave of certainty. The observer needed 5 days of uninterrupted power from Finch's anchor to reach maximum resonance frequency. We have 5 days, Rook, Thorne declared, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. 5 days before that thing comes back, not just to pass through, but to fully materialize and stay here. The return drive to Redwood County PD was done at breakneck speed. They dropped Elara Vance, still comatose and secured to the blinking transmitter, at a state-run medical facility under heavy police guard. Thorne ensured that Dr. Chen was immediately put on the case, with strict instructions. The transmitter was to be untouched, photographed, and kept under constant observation. Back at the station, the news of Professor Finch's gruesome discovery and the terrifying encounter at Timberline Ridge was met with a mixture of disbelief and panic. Captain Davies, faced with the undeniable evidence of the strange blood, the headless body, and the hysterical accounts of the two detectives, immediately contacted the FBI's Regional Office for Paranormal and Inexplicable Phenomena, PIE Division, a unit most officers considered a joke until today. Thorne and Rourke ignored the mounting chaos, sequestering themselves in the evidence room with the journal. 5 days, Marcus. We're burning daylight, Rourke stated, pointing to the equation Finch had scrawled, RF, max, equals 5 days. We need to find out what happens at maximum resonance frequency, Thorne said, flipping through the journal. Finch didn't just write research, he wrote warnings. Rourke located a heavily circled section, detailing Finch's overarching hypothesis. The true objective is not simple translocation, but dimensional merging, DM. The observer does not wish to visit our reality, it wishes to integrate it. The RF must be pushed to its absolute limit, maintaining the tear for a sustained period, using the captured anchor material to stabilize the conduit. At RF, max, the boundaries between the dimensions will weaken globally, allowing the observer to fully materialize and bring others through. Thorne swore under his breath. It's not just coming for us, Rook. It's opening a highway. And it's using that device powered by Finch's body as a timed catalyst, Rourke added, her finger tracing the sigil. The observer is not in a hurry. It set a clock. So, how do we stop the countdown? Thorne asked, his eyes focused on the only physical clue they had, the large, tarnished brass key they had found in the Blackwood structure. The key was currently secured in a lead-lined safe. Thorne had it brought back to the evidence room. The observer said, the key is now free. Finch clearly used this key to open his journal initially, Rourke observed, picking up the key with gloved hands. But the journal opened by itself during the RF search. It was a lock, Marcus, but what does it unlock now? Thorne thought back to the horrific scene in the cabin. The headless Finch, sitting upright, staring at the sigil on the wall. Look at the sigil again, Rook. The one on the wall and the one carved into that slab of tissue, Thorne instructed. Rourke pulled up the evidence photos. It's a circle intersected by a vertical line, with a small downward-pointing hook on the left. It's not just a symbol, Thorne realized, tapping the brass key. Look at the head of the key. The crow's skull. It's stylized, but the overall shape, the loop of the crow's head, the beak and the shaft, it perfectly mirrors the sigil. The key is the sigil, Rourke concluded. It's a physical manifestation of the dimensional lock. Thorne grabbed his jacket. The observer needed the journal to find the coordinates for the final activation. It needed Alara to activate the transmitter. But it didn't take the key. Why? Because the key is the off switch. Where would Finch hide a failsafe, Marcus? Not in the structure he knew would be compromised. Not in the cabin where he was hiding, Thorne stated firmly. He'd hide it where he spent the most time, somewhere mundane, something he used every day that he could easily access before his final escape attempt. Thorne remembered the initial missing person report on Professor Alastair Finch. The last place he was officially seen was his office on the university campus. Rourke, we're going to Finch's office at Redwood University. If this key is the failsafe, it unlocks the device that can disrupt the RF. Max, countdown. And I guarantee Finch had a secondary plan to stop what he started, Thorne said. They arrived at the vast, Gothic architecture of Redwood University well after midnight. Finch's office was in the oldest wing, dedicated to metaphysical history and advanced theoretical physics. Using their police authority, they easily accessed the professor's cluttered, dusty office. The room was a chaotic testament to Finch's obsession, filled with blackboards covered in complex equations, stacks of esoteric books, and strange, antique scientific instruments. Rourke immediately noticed a large, intricate, 19th-century grandfather clock standing in the corner. It wasn't running and its wooden case was covered in dust. This is too heavy for him to move easily, Rourke noted. But it's too grand for this shabby office. Thorne approached the clock. The face was elaborate, but instead of Roman numerals, it featured a strange, swirling geometric pattern. There was no visible lock, but at the center of the face, where the clock hands would normally pivot, was a small, circular recess. Thorne held up the brass key. The ornate crow's skull head was the exact size and shape of the recess. This is it, Thorne breathed. He carefully inserted the key into the clock face. It slid in smoothly, locking with a definitive, mechanical clunk. The moment the key turned, the stillness of the room was shattered. The clock's inner workings came alive with a high-pitched whirring sound. The geometric patterns on the clock face began to spin rapidly. Then the clock case didn't open, it shifted. A panel on the side of the clock slid away, revealing a cavity. Inside the cavity sat a device, a handheld, bronze-cased instrument that looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and an old telegraph machine. It had a heavy lever and a glowing amber crystal embedded in its side. And emanating from the amber crystal was a faint, low-frequency hum, precisely matching the vibration they had heard at the station and the cabin. The RF disruptor, Rourke concluded, her eyes wide with relief. Thorne reached in and took the bronze device. It was cold and heavy. A single word was etched into the casing beneath the crystal: Eclipse. The failsafe, Thorne said, holding the device. The observer wasn't interested in the key because the observer never intended for US to find this. But as Thorne pulled the device clear of the clock, the humming stopped. The amber crystal faded to gray. The lever was locked in the off position. It's dead, Rourke whispered. Thorne turned the device over. On the back, in Finch's cramped handwriting, was a final, chilling instruction, written in permanent marker. Must be charged at the point of RF. Max. Conduit. The first anchor. Blackwood Forest, Thorne realized. The site of the Civic in the structure. The original, first anchor material, the blood on the door, is still there holding the tear open. We have to take this back to where it all began, and we have less than 5 days to do it. Thorne and Rourke drove straight through the pre-dawn darkness, the silent bronze eclipse device resting between them on the dashboard. The plan was reckless: return to the initial crime scene, the Blackwood Forest Preserve, and use the residual energy of the dimensional tear, the first anchor, to charge Finch's failsafe. Back at the station, Captain Davies was attempting to coordinate with the PIE division, but Thorne knew bureaucratic red tape would slow down any official response. They had less than 5 days. As they reached the rough logging road leading to the Civic, the atmosphere changed drastically. The air grew heavy, smelling strongly of ozone and damp earth, a metallic scent that permeated the car's vents. The trees seemed to lean in, their ancient limbs forming a darker canopy than before. The tear is stabilizing, Rourke noted, checking the time. The RF. Max. Countdown is working. The observer is close to its goal. They drove past the established police tape, which now sagged and was covered in frost. The abandoned blue Civic sat exactly where it was left, sealed by police evidence tape. The early morning light cast a sickly gray pallor over the scene. We need to get the Eclipse to the first anchor, Thorne said, parking the cruiser. He grabbed the bronze device. The blood on the door. They approached the Civic. The bloody handprint on the driver's side door, the observer's proxy hand residue, was unmistakable. It looked darker, almost black, and was visibly oozing a fresh, slick fluid onto the blue paint. "The anchor is actively regenerating," Rourke whispered, looking closer at the gruesome smear. "It's a two-way street. The observer is stabilizing the tear, and the tear is feeding the anchor." Thorne placed the bronze eclipse device against the oozing blood smear on the door. He pressed it hard against the viscous, non-human material. There was an immediate, violent reaction. The bronze casing of the eclipse device began to vibrate uncontrollably, humming with the same low, deep frequency they had heard before. The gray crystal on the side of the device flared to life, not amber but a brilliant, searing violet. The light pulsed, drawing energy from the blood. The handprint on the door began to shrink, shriveling away from the device as if being rapidly dehydrated. "It's working, Marcus. It's drawing the anchor material's energy," Rourke exclaimed. Thorne kept pressure on the device, his teeth clenched against the high-frequency whine now emanating from the crystal. The vibration was so intense it felt like the bones in his hand were grinding together. Then the interior of the car reacted. Inside the Civic, the single, faint, left handprint on the window, Ilara Vance's residual anchor material, began to glow with a faint blue phosphorescence. Suddenly, a loud, distressed moan echoed from the woods. It wasn't the observer's roar, it was a human sound of deep, profound misery, coming from the dense trees just beyond the service road. "That's Ilara," Rourke gasped, turning her head toward the source of the sound. "But she's 50 miles away in a coma." Thorne didn't look away from the device. "It's not her, Rook. It's the residual psychic echo, the tether. The eclipse is disrupting the connection, and the observer is fighting back." The violet light on the eclipse device intensified to an almost painful degree, bathing the entire clearing in a shocking, otherworldly glow. The moaning from the woods grew into a sustained, desperate wail. Then Thorne heard a faint, distinct voice coming from the front seat of the Civic, seemingly emanating from the dashboard itself. Don't let him finish." It was a fragmented, spectral voice, Ilara Vance's, a final, dying message trapped in the residual RF field of the car. As the voice faded, the last sliver of the observer's bloody handprint vanished from the door. The violet light of the eclipse device snapped back down, stabilizing into a sustained, bright amber glow. The humming stopped. Thorne pulled the device away. The driver's door of the Civic was clean, the blue paint pristine. The first anchor was gone. The eclipse was fully charged. "It's done," Thorne breathed, looking at the glowing amber crystal. The device felt warm and inert. Rourke, still shaken by the spectral voice, pointed to the brass key now mounted to the grandfather clock. "What now? We have the weapon. Where is the point of impact?" Thorne checked the eclipse. The bronze casing had a small, hinged aperture that opened to reveal a tiny map etched into the metal beneath the crystal. The map showed the region with the Blackwood and Timberline locations marked. But a third location, a massive, centralized point, was blinking rapidly. It was the center of Redwood County, the heart of the city, the City Hall clock tower. The observer needs the highest point in the city, where the tectonic energy intersects with the infrastructure, Thorne realized. It's the ultimate antenna. It's not just merging the dimensions, it's going to use the city's power grid as the conduit for its full materialization. "When?" Rourke demanded. Thorne looked at his watch. The digital time was 6 a.m. They had approximately 4 days and 18 hours remaining on the countdown. "The moment RF. Max. It's," Thorne confirmed. "We have to get to the clock tower. We have to be there when the observer starts the final phase." Suddenly, the charged eclipse device in Thorne's hand began to emit a rapid, percussive tapping sound. It wasn't a signal, it sounded mechanical, like tiny clockwork gears clicking inside the casing. Rourke moved closer. "What is that sound?" Thorne held the device up to his ear. The tapping wasn't coming from the crystal, it was coming from the tiny, heavy lever on the side of the bronze casing. The lever was slowly, methodically ticking down, like a timer set to 0. Thorne stared at the countdown. If the eclipse was the key to stopping the dimensional merging, why did it have its own timer? Thorne and Rourke raced back toward the city, the heavy bronze eclipse device ticking relentlessly on the dashboard. The sound was a tiny, metallic metronome marking their finite time. "Why the timer, Marcus?" "Finch built it to disrupt the RF, not to explode," Rourke asked, her voice tense as she monitored their speed. Thorne was flipping through the final pages of the journal, now back in its evidence bag. Finch was a scientist, Rook. He didn't trust a simple switch. This is a dead man's switch. Listen to this. A late entry written in pencil, almost erased. The true nature of the RF is cyclical. The observer's RF max is not a static point but a synchronized wave peak. The eclipse must be activated at the exact zenith of the wave, or the resulting disruption will only strengthen the tear. The timing must be precise. I have set the internal timer to synchronize with the calculated RF max zenith. So the timer isn't a bomb countdown, Thorne realized. It's the exact moment we have to hit the activation lever. Too early, too late, and we fail. And if the observer is using the City Hall clock tower as a giant antenna, it means the zenith of the wave will be centralized right there, Rourke concluded. The maximum concentration of the RF will be at the tower's highest point. They sped through the empty downtown streets and reached City Hall just as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. The massive clock tower, a towering piece of historical architecture, dominated the city skyline. Thorne called Captain Davies, updating him on the observer's plan and the location of the final confrontation. Davies, now convinced of the existential threat, scrambled the nearest tactical unit to secure the base of the clock tower and evacuate the surrounding area. Thorne and Rourke parked a block away, their focus entirely on the bronze eclipse device. The rhythmic tick-tick-tick was the loudest sound in the car. "We go in alone," Thorne stated. "The fewer people near that RF field, the better." We climbed to the clock mechanism room, the highest enclosed space. They quickly ascended the hundreds of steps inside the dusty, spiraling staircase of the clock tower. The air grew stale and colder with every floor. As they reached the final landing leading to the clockworks room, the ticking of the eclipse device grew frantic. It was counting down its final, calculated hour. Thorne forced open the heavy oak door leading to the mechanism room. The room was vast and filled with the enormous, polished brass gears and cables of the city's main clock, silent and imposing. But it was not empty. In the center of the room, perched precariously on a scaffolding beam directly beneath the largest clock face, was the observer. The creature was still massive, its obsidian skin reflecting the faint light filtering through the clock faces. But it looked different. It was less condensed and more real, its shadowy outline gaining sharper definition. It was the materialization of something truly alien. And surrounding it was a visible, crackling field of energy, the growing resonance frequency. The brass gears of the clock were humming, vibrating so violently that dust was shaking off the metal. The observer was not waiting. Its two massive hooked arms were extended toward the main clock mechanism, and it was actively working, weaving strands of pulsing blue-white energy into the largest gear. "It's rigging the clock, Marcus," Rourke whispered, leveling her weapon. "It's using the mechanism to amplify the RF for the final wave." The observer registered their presence, letting out a grating hiss of recognition. Its vacant eye sockets fixed on the glowing amber crystal of the eclipse device in Thorne's hand. It lunged, but the small space and the intricate clockwork slowed its massive form. "Distract it, Rook. Keep it away from this corner," Thorne commanded. Rourke immediately opened fire, targeting the creature's exposed flanks. The heavy rounds sparked and chipped against the observer's armor, slowing its advance but doing no true damage. Thorne sprinted to the corner of the room, near a large copper electrical junction box. He knew that the RF field would be weakest here, on the periphery of the main mechanism. He pulled the eclipse device from his jacket. The amber crystal was glowing furiously, and the mechanical tick-tick-tick was now a deafening, rapid countdown. 1 minute remaining. The observer ignored Rourke's continued fire and turned its attention entirely to Thorne. It surged forward, its massive claws scraping against the metal scaffolding. "It knows the threat. It's coming for you, Marcus," Rourke screamed, realizing the creature viewed the eclipse as its only danger. Thorne ignored the terror mounting in his gut. He had to be here. He had to be ready for the zenith. He saw the clock hands through the mechanism. 6:02 a.m. He checked the eclipse. 30 seconds. The observer lunged, its massive hooked arms sweeping toward Thorne. He ducked, the claw tearing a chunk out of the plaster wall behind him. The force of the blow rattled his teeth. He leveled his pistol and fired his remaining rounds into the creature's empty face, a desperate, last-ditch effort. The creature paused for a fraction of a second, shaking off the impact. 10 seconds. Thorne threw his empty pistol aside and gripped the bronze casing of the eclipse, his eyes locked on the rapidly ticking lever. Rourke, seeing Thorne was unarmed, rushed the creature, ramming her shoulder into its side, pushing it momentarily off balance. 5 seconds. The ticking was a blur. The observer regained its footing, letting out a terrible, triumphant shriek. Its entire body began to glow with the same chaotic blue-white energy it was feeding into the clock. The RF field had reached its peak. The lever on the eclipse snapped to zero. Thorne slammed the heavy lever on the bronze casing down with all his might. The amber crystal exploded with a silent, blinding flash of pure white light. The light didn't just illuminate the room, it seemed to shatter the very air. A pulse of counter-RF energy generated by Finch's failsafe shot out from the eclipse, colliding instantly with the observer's maximum frequency wave. The resulting collision was cataclysmic. A shockwave of pure force ripped through the clock room. The brass gears seized up instantly, shearing off teeth and sending sparks flying. The clock tower itself groaned, swaying under the intense, non-physical pressure. Thorne was thrown backward, hitting the wall hard, his vision momentarily replaced by the searing white afterglow. He heard Rourke cry out as she too was flung across the room. When his vision returned, the room was eerily silent. The massive clock mechanism was dead, permanently fused. And the observer was gone. The spot where the creature had stood was empty. There was no smoke, no corpse, no blood. The white light of the eclipse had consumed it, sending it back to its dimension, and crucially destroying the RF wave before it could stabilize the tear. Thorne staggered to his feet, checking on Rourke, who was nursing a bruised shoulder. "It's over, Rook. We stopped the wave." Rourke pointed to the center of the room. Lying there, where the observer had been working, was a single, tiny item. The small brass key shaped like a crow's skull. The key was clean, no longer tarnished, shimmering with a faint, residual blue light. It was the only physical remnant of the fight. "The dimensional lock," Rourke murmured. The observer dropped it in the chaos. Thorne picked up the key. It felt warm, almost alive in his palm. He had done it. He had closed the door. The silence in the City Hall clock tower was deafening, a profound contrast to the chaotic energy of the dimensional clash. The immense clock mechanism was permanently fused, its hands frozen at the moment of activation. 6:03 a.m. Thorne and Rourke descended the spiraling staircase, carrying the deactivated Eclipse device and the small, heavy brass key. Outside, the scene was controlled chaos. Tactical officers had secured the perimeter, and Captain Davies was waiting anxiously at the base of the tower. "What happened up there, Thorne?" "We heard a sound like a small earthquake, then everything just went quiet," Davies demanded, his eyes wide with fear and relief. Thorne held up the bronze Eclipse device. "Professor Finch's failsafe worked, Captain. The dimensional tear is closed. The threat is neutralized." He handed Davies the brass key. "This is the last piece of evidence." The observer dropped it. "It's the key to the entire operation, the physical lock to the tear." Davies stared at the key, then at Thorne's soot-streaked, exhausted face. "And Alara Vance? The college girl?" "She was the target, sir. Used to activate the observer's final device," Rourke interjected. "We believe the observer's full consciousness has retreated. Dr. Chin needs to check her immediately. She's the only one who can tell us what happens when a human is used as an anchor material." The subsequent investigation was an absolute nightmare for the official police record. Captain Davies managed to suppress the most fantastical details, classifying the incident as a catastrophic biochemical terrorist attack, involving a rogue physics professor and a powerful localized energy device that destroyed the City Hall clock and caused a localized power outage. The FBI's PIE division arrived and immediately seized all related evidence. The Eclipse device, the blood samples with the 28 chromosomes, the meat offering and Professor Finch's journal. They confirmed Thorne and Rourke's findings. The observer was an extra-dimensional entity attempting a full materialization. Alara Vance, however, remained the greatest mystery. When Dr. Chin examined her, the small transmitter that Alara had activated was inert, the red light extinguished. Alara was still in a deep coma, her eyes rolled back. But the tissue wounds on her hands and feet were entirely healed. Not scarred, but perfectly, surgically restored, as if the anchor material had been consumed, and the damage subsequently reversed by the withdrawal of the observer's energy. "Her vitals are strong, Detective," Dr. Chin told Thorne days later. "She's not just healing, she's perfect. But her brain activity, it's almost non-existent. Like a deep-sea diver's consciousness, it's there but it's buried beneath incredible pressure." 2 weeks after the incident, the investigation was officially closed by the FBI. Thorne and Rourke were given medals for bravery in the face of domestic terrorism, and mandated 2 weeks of paid leave. On his first day off, Thorne couldn't stay home. He drove to the Blackwood Forest Preserve. The site of the structure was sterilized by the FBI, leaving behind only turned earth and a flattened clearing. He found Rourke there, standing by the exact spot where Alara Vance's car had been found. "They did a good job of scrubbing this place," Thorne commented, joining her. "Too good," Rourke replied, looking around. "It's like they erased the memory of the event itself. Except for this." Rourke pointed to the trunk of an ancient pine tree, just beyond where the police tape used to hang. Scraped into the bark, barely visible, was the familiar symbol: the sigil, the circle, the vertical line, and the hook. "The observer may have retreated, Marcus, but the knowledge is still here," Rourke said, pulling a photocopy of the final page of Finch's journal from her pocket. She pointed to the last mysterious note Finch had written. "Max equals 5 days." Below that, she pointed to a line Thorne had missed in the chaos, written vertically along the margin. "The door is never truly locked, only relocated." "The observer didn't just drop the key, Marcus," Rourke theorized, her voice low. "It left the key here with the FBI. It knew we would use the key to close the tear. But the key's function is only to seal the active tear, not to destroy the underlying RF pattern." Thorne felt a familiar knot of dread return. "So the dimensional lock is still active. The tear is just elsewhere now." Rourke nodded grimly. "And Finch's journal, the ultimate guide to dimensional merging, is now in the hands of the PIE division. The people who think they can weaponize it." Thorne looked at the scraped sigil on the pine tree. The fight wasn't over. The observer hadn't lost, it had simply relocated the battle, leaving behind the necessary tools, the suppressed knowledge and the active key, to begin the next phase. "Get some rest, Rook," Thorne said, turning back toward the service road. "I have a feeling our leave is going to be very short." A year passed. The bizarre incidents of the Blackwood Forest and the City Hall clock tower faded into the city's collective memory, dismissed as the eccentric final act of a mad professor. The official investigation remained classified. Thorne and Rourke were quietly transferred to a newly established, unpublicized task force operating out of a cramped, windowless office. A shadow unit overseen by Captain Davies, who now had the grim, haunted look of a man who knew exactly what the shadows held. Their sole focus: dimensional merging (DM), and anticipating the next move of the observer. They had access to every piece of unclassified data and, more importantly, Finch's complete journal, photocopies of course. One crisp autumn evening, Rourke was reviewing the final complex diagram in Finch's journal, a schematic for the Eclipse device, when she noticed a tiny, almost invisible notation, written in the same faded pencil as the countdown warning. "Na equals NT plus 1. "Marcus," Rourke said, pushing the schematic across the desk. Finch wasn't just tracking the RF. He was predicting the observer's next step. "N is the number of anchors. N is the number of targets." Thorne leaned in. Target 1 was Alara Vance. Anchor 1 was the observer's proxy hand. Target 2 was Finch. Anchor 2 was his body and the final transmitter. "Exactly," Rourke confirmed. Finch predicted the observer would need 3 targets, and by extension 3 anchors, to achieve a stable full materialization in this dimension. Alara was used to activate the process. Finch was used to time the process. The third target will be used to finalize the process. Thorne picked up the phone to call Dr. Chen at the state facility. "How's Alara Vance? Any change?" "Detective Thorne," Chen replied, her voice low and clinical. "Alara Vance is awake. She woke up 3 hours ago. But she's not fully present. Her speech is fragmented, mostly repeating 2 phrases. He's hungry, and the sound is close." "Did you remove the final device?" Thorne pressed. "There was no final device, Detective. The observer left no trace of the transmitter on Finch's body. However," Chen hesitated, "Alara's body is emitting a low-frequency hum, and her blood type is changing. It's now showing trace elements of the same cellular anomalies we found in the observer's proxy hand blood." Thorne looked at Rourke, a chilling realization dawning. Alara Vance wasn't healed, she was remade. "She's not a victim anymore, Rook," Thorne whispered into the phone. "She's an active, stabilized anchor. The observer left her behind as a failsafe." Just then, a news alert flashed across the small TV screen in the corner of their office. A breaking story: a high-security research facility outside of Redwood County reported a catastrophic containment breach. The facility was known to house artifacts recovered from historical disaster zones. The main target of the breach: a perfectly preserved, massive, obsidian-black meteorite recovered from a 19th-century excavation site. The anchor material: Rourke breathed. "It's not human this time. It's geological." Thorne stared at the screen. The facility was just outside the city limits, situated directly above the intersection of two major water lines and a massive underground electrical conduit. The perfect nexus of earth, water, and power. He grabbed his jacket and the final piece of evidence, the brass key, the dimensional lock. "The observer won't need a 5-day countdown this time, Rook. It already has the RF amplified by Elara and the perfect anchor material, that meteorite, to stabilize the tear permanently." They arrived at the research facility to find a scene of silent destruction. The steel-reinforced walls of the containment bay were ripped outward, not blasted but pulled apart like wet clay. Inside the bay, the observer was already at work. It was fully materialized, standing perhaps 8 feet tall, a monstrous figure of glistening obsidian with those massive hooked claws. It was performing a terrifying ritual, using the massive meteorite, now glowing with the same eerie blue-white RF energy, as the focal point. But the observer was not alone. Standing beside the creature, holding a small silver-plated device that was broadcasting a steady resonant hum, was Elara Vance. Her eyes were still milky white, but her face was alight with a zealous, terrifying focus. Her healed hands were cradling the device, which was clearly generating the necessary RF to stabilize the tear. "Target 3, Thorne muttered, raising his pistol. "Elara is the controller. She's been turned into the observer's ultimate proxy." The observer saw them and turned, but it did not attack. It spoke, its voice no longer a terrible roar, but a calm, synthesized tone that resonated with immense power. "The third anchor is in place. The door is open. It requires only the final key." The observer lifted its hand, pointing a claw directly at Thorne. Rourke immediately fired, hitting the observer in the shoulder. The creature didn't flinch, its attention fixed on Thorne. "The key, Marcus. The dimensional lock." Rourke yelled. "It needs the key to finalize the materialization." Thorne looked down at the brass key in his palm, then at the massive, glowing meteorite. He realized the terrifying truth: the key wasn't the failsafe anymore. It was the final latch. He made a split-second decision. He didn't rush the observer. He ran straight for Elara Vance. "Rourke, cover me. I'm going for the controller." Thorne lunged, tackling Elara. The observer shrieked in rage, realizing Thorne's intent. As they hit the floor, the silver-plated device skittered away, its high-frequency hum instantly dying. With the RF field destabilized, the meteorite's blue-white glow began to flicker. The observer, deprived of its stabilizing wave, staggered backward, its obsidian body shimmering, momentarily losing cohesion. Thorne pinned Elara, whose physical strength was still terrifyingly unnatural. He forced her face down, screaming, "Elara! Fight it! Break the connection!" Elara let out that high-pitched, metallic shriek, struggling fiercely. "He's hungry. The sound is close." The observer, fighting to materialize, turned its immense focus on Thorne, its massive claws tearing through the floor toward him. Thorne reached into his pocket, pulling out the single powerful object he still possessed, the brass key. He slammed the key down, not into the observer, not into the meteorite, but into a deep gouge in the floor. He activated his ultimate defense: destruction of the surrounding reality. Thorne pulled the key out, and with a final, primal roar, he smashed the key headfirst into the copper-plated junction box that regulated the power for the entire facility. A massive surge of electricity, combined with the lingering RF energy,